Before we dive into one of the most sophisticated military operations of the 21st century, if you're passionate about uncovering the hidden strategies behind modern warfare and global intelligence operations, make sure to subscribe to IntelX. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the stories that reshape our world. Now, let's begin. Picture this, September 28th, 2025. The clock strikes 6:34 in the evening. Across multiple command centers along Russia's western frontier, every screen simultaneously erupts in crimson warnings. This wasn't just another incursion. This was something the Russian military had never encountered before. A perfectly choreographed assault unfolding across three different regions at once: Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk. The coordination was flawless, the timing surgical. Hidden behind Ukrainian civilian settlements north of Kharkiv, two M142 HIMARS batteries had silently maneuvered into position. Their crews waited, fingers poised, watching the digital countdown. From Ukrainian territory, dozens of aerial threats began their journey into Russian airspace. But these weren't the crude, improvised drones the world had grown accustomed to seeing in conflict footage. These were UJ-26 Bober extended-range variants and Sheila 400 long-range kamikaze platforms. Sophisticated weapon systems, each hauling warheads between 30 and 50 kilograms of high explosives. The Russian response was immediate and textbook perfect. Panzer S-1 and Tor M2 batteries roared to life. The night sky transformed into a light show of interceptor missiles and anti-aircraft fire. Operators in Russian air defense centers marked each successful kill with satisfaction. The systems were performing exactly as designed. The airspace was secure, or so they believed. What Russian commanders didn't realize in that moment is, of manufactured confidence was that they were watching Act 1 of a meticulously crafted deception. While their attention fixated on the aerial circus above, the genuine threat was approaching from a completely different vector, one they wouldn't see coming until it was far too late. Then, at the peak of the chaos, radar operators in Belgorod detected something that made their blood run cold. 6 new signatures appeared on their screens, but these weren't behaving like drones. They weren't flying horizontally across the landscape. They were plummeting vertically from the upper atmosphere at velocities exceeding Mach 2.5. The frantic chatter in the command center died instantly. Everyone understood what this meant. The rules of engagement had just changed completely. These were M31 GMLRS rockets, guided multiple launch rocket system munitions fired from HIMARS platforms. Ballistic threats of an entirely different magnitude. Without hesitation, the Russian commander made the call that would seal his fate. He activated the crown jewel of Russian air defense, an S-400 battery that had remained hidden and silent, held in reserve for exactly this type of critical moment. This wasn't just another weapon system. This was the most valuable defensive asset in the entire region. The massive 92N6E gravestone radar emitted its powerful electromagnetic signature, locking onto all 6 incoming threats. Within seconds, 48 N6DM interceptor missiles screamed skyward at Mach 6. Moments later, 6 brilliant explosions blossomed in the thin air of the upper atmosphere. The operator's voice crackled across the command net. All targets destroyed, direct hits confirmed, all 6 ballistic threats intercepted. Relief washed through the Russian command center like a wave. Pride followed closely behind. They had just defeated the most complex, multi-layered assault they'd ever faced. But hundreds of kilometers away, inside a fortified underground facility somewhere in Ukraine, there was no disappointment, no frustration. Instead, there was quiet satisfaction, because the most critical phase of the entire operation had just concluded with absolute perfection. The truth was, this operation had begun hours earlier. Ukraine had unleashed a massive swarm, over 200 UAVs dispersed across 8 separate Russian regions: Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Tula, Yaroslavl, Rostov, Novgorod, and Samara. It was one of the largest coordinated drone offensives Russia had ever witnessed, and its purpose was never to destroy. Its purpose was to blind. While Russian commanders congratulated themselves on their defensive victory, they remained oblivious to the reality. They had been dancing to Ukraine's tune from the very beginning. This massive drone swarm was a smokescreen, designed to consume Russia's expensive interceptors, drain their missile inventories, and most crucially, to monopolize their attention while locking their radar systems in every direction except the one that mattered. Because the actual target was singular and devastating, the Belgorod Thermal Power Plant, located approximately 90 kilometers from Kharkiv, And this was no arbitrary selection. According to open-source intelligence platforms and satellite reconnaissance, this facility represented far more than a power station. It was the beating heart of the entire region's military-industrial nervous system. Every electron it generated fed into the machinery that sustained Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, the very units responsible for some of the most brutal operations across eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence understood that such a critical asset would be protected by the most sophisticated air defenses Russia could deploy. And that's precisely what made this operation brilliant. They weren't trying to avoid the defenses. They were going to use them as weapons against themselves. Inside Ukraine's underground command center, an electronic warfare specialist stared at his monitor, watching the electromagnetic signature bloom across his display. His voice was calm, almost casual. "We've got it. Exact coordinates, operating frequency, signal strength, everything. Send the second salvo. Fire at will." In that single moment, the entire operation revealed its genius. Those $6 million HIMARS rockets that Russia had just intercepted, they were never meant to hit anything. They were the most expensive, fastest-moving decoys in military history. Their sole mission was to force that hidden S-400 to break radio silence, to reveal its position, its identity, its electronic fingerprint, and it had worked perfectly. The S-400's coordinates and frequency data were immediately transmitted to a second HIMARS battery waiting at a different location, and to heavy kamikaze drones like the UJ-26 Bober already advancing toward the area. The real hunt was about to begin. At 6:46 p.m., in a completely different position, a second HIMARS crew who had been waiting in absolute silence received their updated fire mission. They launched 6 more rockets toward the primary target. The thermal power plant, now vulnerable as its Guardian S-400 system, was either reloading or caught in the brief recalibration cycle that follows every engagement. In the Russian command center, the atmosphere of victory evaporated instantly, replaced by icy horror. 6 new ballistic signatures appeared on their screens. The second wave was incoming. Panic erupted. These M31 GMLRS missiles crossed from Ukraine into Russian territory in just 40 seconds, diving from near-orbital altitudes. Operators frantically attempted to re-engage with the S-400, but the system was trapped in those critical few seconds of blindness. Meanwhile, the Panzer and Tor batteries were still desperately fighting the Bober and Sheila drones that now swarmed toward the exposed S-400 positions. As the HIMARS rockets made their terminal descent toward the power plant, the S-400's radar finally reactivated. It detected the threat. A Russian officer began transmitting an alert to his superiors. But in that exact moment, a UJ-26 Bober that had been lurking at low altitude, invisible beneath the radar coverage, made its final dive directly into the command vehicle housing the radar control system. The S-400's radar wasn't designed to detect and engage such a small target at such close proximity. The surrounding Panzer and Tor systems were occupied with other drone swarms approaching from different vectors. For just a handful of seconds, a fatal gap opened in the defensive network. When the Bober's 40-kilogram warhead detonated against the S-400's brain, less than 30 seconds remained before the HIMARS missiles reached their destination. The gravestone radar screen flickered and died. This time, nothing could stop them. At exactly 6:47 p.m., 6 HIMARS rockets, each programmed with a circular error probable of less than 5 meters, struck the main transformer station at the heart of Belgorod's electrical grid with surgical precision. This wasn't simply an explosion. It was the triggering of an uncontrolled chain reaction. The 90-kilogram unitary warheads instantly pulverized tons of steel and copper infrastructure. High-voltage lines snapped. A massive electrical arc transformed night into day for a brief, terrifying moment. And then, absolute darkness. The energy that had been flowing from the Belgorod Thermal Plant powered everything that made modern warfare possible. The radars that gave eyes to S-300 and S-400 batteries throughout the region, the complex communication networks and command bunkers, and most critically, the electrical signaling infrastructure that formed the lifeblood of the railway network transporting ammunition, fuel, and personnel to the front. Destroying this plant didn't just turn off lights. It blinded an army's eyes, deafened its ears, and crippled its legs. When the grid collapsed, it triggered a cascading failure across the entire region. Water pumps ceased operating. Internet connections severed. Life in a city of 500,000 people ground to a virtual standstill. As hours passed, the situation evolved from inconvenience into existential crisis. People trapped in elevators, roads paralyzed by non-functioning traffic signals, stores that could only accept cash, heating systems offline, water supplies cut, internet and mobile communication infrastructure collapsed. Kilometers-long queues formed at gas stations. Fights erupted over generator fuel. Crowds stormed supermarkets. Total panic consumed the civilian population. While Russia's defense ministry triumphantly announced they had shot down 230 UAVs, they remorse, unaware they'd actually fallen into an elaborate trap. When the governor of Belgorod made his statement at 7:07 p.m., the Kremlin confronted bitter reality. The Russian military's propaganda about intercepting hundreds of targets instantly crumbled when Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov delivered his panicked confession. There has been an attack on our critical infrastructure facility. Serious power outages are occurring throughout the region. That evening, Russian state media attempted to characterize the incident as a transformer malfunction. That narrative was demolished within seconds by NASA's firm satellite system, which detected massive thermal signatures in the area, and by videos captured by civilians on the ground. This operation was a military symphony in which more than 230 UAVs served a singular purpose: to ensure that a handful of HIMARS rockets reached their target, and when those rockets arrived, they destroyed far more than a power plant. They shattered Russia's myth of invincibility. Ukraine's precision strike against the Belgorod Thermal Power Plant on September 28, 2025, will be remembered as a pivotal moment in modern warfare. The consequences extended far beyond destroyed transformers and darkened cities. It represented the catastrophic collapse of an entire system and fundamentally challenged Russia's established military doctrine. Russian military philosophy has always centered on keeping warfare distant from its own borders. The Belgorod strike demonstrated painfully that this doctrine no longer holds in an era of long-range precision weapons. The concept of a front line had become obsolete. A rocket launched from Kharkiv could strike Moscow's backyard. The psychological impact on soldiers at the front was devastating in the truest sense. To truly appreciate the brilliance of this attack, one must understand why the Belgorodskaya plant was chosen. It wasn't a randomly selected piece of civilian infrastructure. It was the heart of an entire region's military-industrial nervous system, a systemic center of gravity. Ukraine's objective wasn't the megawatts the plant produced. The real target was everything dependent on those megawatts: the railways supplying Russia's southern front, the factories manufacturing ammunition, the command centers directing troops. According to analysis from institutions like the Institute for the Study of War, Belgorod Oblast functioned as a vital rear base for operations in Ukraine. This region specifically sustained the main supply and command infrastructure of Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, the units responsible for the bloodiest operations in eastern Ukraine. The uninterrupted, stable electricity provided by this plant was essential for every component of this massive military structure to function. A power outage meant that ammunition depots, armored vehicle maintenance facilities, electronic listening stations, and most importantly, forward command centers directing troops would instantly plunge into darkness and silence. Certainly these facilities had backup generators, but a generator cannot rotate the massive S-400 radar antennas for extended periods. It cannot simultaneously and reliably power strategic satellite communication terminals or all the barracks housing thousands of soldiers. That night, Russian commanders found themselves transported from 21st century warfare back to the analog world of the 20th century. Encrypted communication lines severed. Situational awareness displays went dark. Real-time intelligence feeds from the front lines were cut off as if by a knife. It was like severing the oxygen supply to an army's brain. The wheels of the industrial war machine ground to a sudden halt. Manufacturing facilities in and around Belgorod had rapidly converted to producing ammunition, military equipment components, and repair services since the war's onset. Facilities like the Karachevsky Electrostal factory in the Bryansk region, which had been targeted, specialized in developing and producing critical electrical connectors for military and industrial applications. The power outage was a crowbar jammed into the gears of this massive production apparatus. Assembly lines screeched to a halt. Machines pressing artillery shells fell silent. Robotic arms welding tank armor hung frozen mid-operation. Modern industry depends on stable, high-quality electrical power. The fluctuating voltage supplied by generators cannot operate precision CNC machinery or production lines manufacturing complex electronic components. Every passing hour meant hundreds fewer artillery shells produced, Dozens fewer vehicles repaired, truckloads less ammunition reaching the front lines. But the most devastating link in this domino effect emerged when it struck the railway network, the steel backbone of Russia's military logistics. Russian military doctrine depends heavily on railways to transport enormous quantities of material and personnel across vast distances. Belgorod served as one of the most critical junctions of this backbone. The rail lines passing through this region connected resources from Russia's interior to Donbas and Crimea via Rostov in the south, a substantial portion of these lines are electrified. When electricity ceased, all signaling systems, switch controls, and communication networks managing these railways shut down instantly. Fuel tankers, ammunition wagons, trains packed with soldiers all became trapped in Belgorod's dark labyrinth. Russian logistics collapsed in an instant. Using only a few hundred kilograms of explosives, Ukraine managed to neutralize tens of thousands of tons of steel and thousands of soldiers without firing a single additional shot. The military genius of the Belgorod operation lies not merely in selecting the right target, but in the multi-layered deception strategy employed to reach it. This was a masterclass in reinterpreting classical military tactics through 21st century technology. The most audacious and clever element of the operation was using the first HIMARS salvo as bait, sacrificing 6 GMLRS rockets, each valued at approximately $170,000. Knowing they would be destroyed required extraordinarily calculated risk assessment, yet the payoff vastly exceeded the cost. This operation left Moscow facing an impossible choice: protect frontline troops or protect strategic infrastructure in the rear. It was no longer possible to do both perfectly simultaneously. Following this attack, Russia was forced to withdraw some of its most advanced air defense systems from frontline positions and redeploy them to protect cities like Belgorod and Kursk, along with other critical infrastructure. Every S-400 or Panzer battery pulled from the front opened a new window of opportunity for Ukraine's air force, drones, and cruise missiles. To defend its own territory, Russia had to leave occupied territories more vulnerable. This was a brilliant triumph of intelligence over brute force, with costs meticulously calculated. This operation proved that modern warfare is no longer fought only on front lines between tanks and trenches, but at critical junctures deep within an adversary's strategic territory. Through perfect synchronization of technology, intelligence, and psychological warfare, Ukraine didn't merely strike a target. They forced their adversary to weaponize its own strength against itself, delivering a masterclass in the art of 21st century warfare. If this analysis opened your eyes to the hidden dimensions of modern military strategy, don't forget to subscribe to IntelX and hit that notification bell. Share this video with anyone interested in understanding how warfare has fundamentally changed in our lifetime. And let me know in the comments what aspect of this operation impressed you most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.